Hello, Keith Rucker here at VintageMachinery.org. Guys, I'm going to give you a quick update on the Jimmy Diresta bandsaw project today. Before we get into that though, just a little quick update on me personally. This past week or so over the Thanksgiving break, came down with a really rough head cold that turned into bronchitis, and as such I just have not been able to get out into the shop and do much the last week and a half. So I'm a little bit behind on my videos, but I did want to give you guys just an update on here. Not really had a chance to do a lot of work to anything. Today's the first time I've been in the shop in over a week, and really not trying to do any real work today, just trying to do a little quick update video for you guys on this. But we did get the main casting here back from our sandblaster. As you can see, he sandblasted this and primed it for me just like he told me he would do. Sent this down to a commercial sandblasting shop, which is about 30 miles south of me, carried down on a trailer. It took them a couple of weeks to get to it. They were kind of backed up, but did a really good job. Sandblasted this thing off, got it down to the original casting, and then sprayed it with a two-part primer is what he told me he was going to use, an epoxy-based primer, and everything looks good on it. Now, I will say, and I'm not surprised by this one bit, but the casting is pretty rough now, as it was before. Even with the bad paint job, with the peeling off, there was a lot of body material filler put on this casting originally at the factory, and when they sandblasted, of course, pretty much all of that came off. So we're looking exactly like the casting looked like when it came from the foundry. And I think one misconception a lot of people have about castings is, some people say, oh man, the castings from this company just really look great, and this company's castings really are rough. Well, the truth of the matter is if you got a machine that has a really smooth casting on it, it probably means that they spent the extra time and effort to put filler on it and to really make it look good. When you're dealing with a casting this size, it's never going to turn out perfect. You're always going to have imperfections in it, and I think a lot of people would probably be shocked sometimes at the imperfections that are in their castings in their machines that are just filled over. But at the end of the day, it's really more cosmetic than structural in most cases, and putting some filler in there is pretty much the way to go. So I thought I'd give you guys a close-up look at this. There's some interesting things about this casting I want to show you guys. Really, you can kind of see how this thing was made in the foundry. I would have loved to have been in the foundry when they were casting this huge casting, and as big as this casting is, you know, they made castings much larger than this, but I think it'd have been really neat to have seen the whole process about how they did it back in the day. This casting's, I'm sure, well over 100 years old. So let's take a closer look at it. Well, this is very typical of what we're seeing as far as the surface finish on this, and you can see it's fairly rough, and you've got some ups and downs. A lot of these little places in here, it's just where when they pulled this pattern from the sand mold, you had some places where the mold may have crumbled or something, and you know, what they would do is they came in here, you can see they just ground it out with a grinder to kind of get it down, and then of course put a body filler on there. One thing that's interesting is you can see these little plugs in here throughout the casting, and I'm not 100% sure what's going on with that, but these are actually steel rods that went through the casting, and I think that what these were actually some supports that helped hold up the core that went inside of this casting to give it that hollowness on the inside. And they would have actually had the steel rods that went through the casting, and when they came out, they just cut them off flush, no big deal. And structurally, it probably has zero impact on anything, but I've noticed that throughout the whole casting. Again, I really would have liked to have been there when they were casting this to see the whole process, because I think it would have been kind of fascinating. Some other interesting things, I don't know whether you can see it in the video or not, but you can see the parallel rough cuts here. This is very indicative of having been done on a metal planer. That's those long vertical cuts. And again, I would have loved to have seen how this whole big casting was machined, because they would have taken a big planer to put this thing on, and they would have had to lay it down on its side so that this surface was, flat like this to be able to do this. They would have had to have a heck of a setup to do that and keep everything nice and square. But really all the surfaces on here were planed. It's a little bit harder to see in here, but you can actually see some planer marks in there, those long straight lines. This was not milled out on a milling machine. Kind of interesting. And I see those planer marks throughout on this thing. And again, some of it makes me scratch my head and wonder how they did it, but they got it done. We're looking straight onto the front. This is where a little attachment went on that slid up and down. But even this surface here was planed in this direction. So again, I'm not sure how they did that. Now, they very well could have done it in the same operation where they planed over here on the side if they'd had a side head on the planer. But with these little indentions in there, that would have been a challenge. But again, I really would have liked to have seen it. Notice that this is what's called a cord pattern. The inside of this casting is hollow. And when this would have been cast in the foundry, basically they would have had a big wooden pattern that would have been the shape of this whole thing. And on the inside, there would have been a sand core that was put inside of there that basically whenever you poured it, it just had a shell around the outside, and then the inside would have been filled with sand where it wouldn't be a solid casting. That was very typical in castings to have cord castings. It saved a lot of money and materials. It really cut down on the weight. And even though it may be counterintuitive, with this thing being hollow on the inside, you basically have a tube now, and it's really structurally more solid and more stable than it would be if it was solid. Things considered, the thickness and so forth like that. Obviously, if you get too thin, that wouldn't be true, but generally speaking, a cord pattern is going to be stronger and more stable than a solid casting, and it's going to get a lot cheaper to make, a lot cheaper to ship, and everything else. So again, I really would have liked to have seen this whole process when it was being cast. Continuing to look at the machining marks on this thing is, again, it's really kind of interesting. It makes you kind of scratch your head. We've seen where, we had the planer marks going up and down up here, and on the front going up and down. That very well could have been done in one setup. You also have this surface is flat, this surface is flat, and then the top of this bearing surface down here is all flat. And you can see the planer marks going in this direction on all of this. Now, what really has me scratching my head on this is I don't know how they did this on a planer, because with this big bandsaw casting coming, on a planer you got the whole brackets and mounting system that the cutters fit on. So it would have had to have had some type of arm that reached out, almost like a shaper arm, that would have, where this whole machine would come up to the main frame and stop and then come back out to do that. I'm sure they had it all figured out. I don't know for sure, but I'm almost positive that down here on the bottom, that the bottom of this casting was also planed. I haven't been able to get underneath it to see, but I'm pretty sure that it was. And all of these plane surfaces here are going to be perpendicular to these plane surfaces, so it was probably done in two different setups. I imagine they probably did this first and then somehow mounted this so that these surfaces would have been perpendicular to these. Again, massive machine that would have had to done this metal work on this thing on a really big casting as well. So again, you would have had a big wooden pattern that would have been this whole casting, and it would have been in two pieces. It would have been a cope and a drag. And if you look, you can very easily see the parting line in here. This is where the two patterns came out. You can see it split all the way down to there. That parting line comes down through here and kind of up through here. It's not in the exact center of the casting. It's more on one side. Probably has to do with the way that the core went inside of those reasons they chose to do it that way. But a huge, massive pattern. Really interesting. You can, like I said, you can see that parting line really well. So you'd had the two wooden patterns that went together, and one would have been in the bottom part of the mold, one would have been in the top part of the mold. Think about how heavy that mold is with all that sand in there. They would have had to have picked it up to get the patterns out. They would have had to have a bridge crane in the foundry to be able to pick up those molds and do all this. I mean, this is some heavy casting. Just doing the pattern work and the molding work was just really on a large scale. And this is relatively small compared to a lot of the castings that were even done back in those days. But still, in my mind, this is just a massive casting. And it really makes me, I don't know that there's any foundries around hardly anymore that can do stuff this size. I'm sure there are, but there's not many guys that can do this kind of work anymore. And this was very commonplace back in the day. But anyway, just some more interesting looking at how this thing would have been made when it was new. I'm going to show you a little bit about the core on the inside, because I think it's interesting to see some things going on there as well. So I'm going to come in here into one of these little holes and let you kind of take a look up inside of there. Got my little GoPro camera out here. Hopefully you can kind of see what's going on. But this is on the inside of the casting. So basically when this was poured, this was all just a solid sand core that fit up in here. And I just wanted you to kind of look up inside of this because it's a view we don't normally get. And what's kind of interesting, and it's really kind of hard to see just looking in the screen, but kind of up in this top left side up in here, you can actually still see some of the sand in there. There was a passage that went clear through to the other side that they never did get all the sand out up in there. So some of the sand from that core is actually still in this casting. And I think you can see it a little bit better on the other side. So let's go over there and look at it. So we're going to go on this little front side here. I got a light in there where hopefully you can kind of see up inside of this, and you can really see some interesting things going on here. Notice number one down here in the bottom of this. I'm going to take a little screwdriver. Look at there. That's the sand. That's the actual core sand that's still in here that they never got cleaned out. So some of that core sand is still in his casting over 100 years ago. And if you look over here kind of on the side, you see these little pieces of metal? That is actually some reinforcing rod that would have been inside the core to give it some strength, kind of like you use rebar inside of concrete. And normally whenever you got through with pulling out the casting, you would pull this metal rod out with it, but they never got that little opening open all the way through up here to go to the other side. So anyway, kind of interesting to have this core sand. Like I said, it's still in here. That sand's been in here for over 100 years. Kind of cool. As far as casting defects, this is about the only place on here I really see anything that's kind of, I would call a defect. And this is on the front leg, kind of right in the very front corner of the machine. There's a similar little hole on the back side, but not quite this big. And I mean, that might be maybe 1/4 of an inch deep. Not a really big deal, not in a very important place. But what's going on here is that this would have been the very highest point of the casting when it was poured. This whole casting would, of course, been laying down on its side. And I'm sure that what happened is when this mold filled up, there was a little air bubble that was trapped inside that didn't get out. Normally you would have vents coming out of this to let the air escape, but a little bit of air got stuck right there, and you ended up with a little air bubble. That's very typical on castings. And again, it's not anything structural. It's not anything that's going to cause a problem. And it'll just be filled over. We'll just fill it up with some type of filler material, and all is well. But that's very typical to see on a casting this size. And I'm really surprised there's not more defects in here than just that right there. That's probably the worst one, or that is the worst one that I see. Well, there you go. Just a quick look at this casting. I thought it was kind of interesting and worth some discussion. Like I said, I really wish I could have seen this thing when it was being poured and when they were doing the machining on it. I'm sure it would have been really interesting. For me, the next step is going to be body filler on this. We'll go ahead and start working on getting this casting smoothed out. I've done that on several restorations in the past, and I'll be honest with you guys, I really hate working with body filler. It's just not my cup of tea. I never have been a paint and body type of a guy. It's just, I don't like doing it, but when you're doing restoration work, sometimes you got to take the good with the bad, so we're going to get through it. I'm going to be using this product here called Evercoat Rage Ultra, or Extra rather, and this is something that was recommended to me by several guys when I was doing this in the past. So this is really a higher quality body filler. It sands really well. I used it when I was working on my horizontal boring mill probably about a year or so ago on that. And I really liked it over the standard Bondo that you can just get it anywhere. Like I said, it costs a little bit more money, but it really was a lot easier to apply and a lot easier to sand after the fact. So that's what we're going to be using, and I'm not going to go any on that today. That's going to be another day out here in the shop. Hopefully I'm going to be feeling like I can get out here and get some work done later this week, and we'll get started applying some body filler and doing some sanding. I imagine it's going to take a couple of passes on this to get it where it needs to be. And I've talked to Jimmy about paint colors, and we've come up with a paint color. I'm not going to spill the beans yet, but he's decided what he wants to paint this, and that's what we're going to go with. So we'll get to that later on. So, but with that today, that is going to be a wrap on this video, and hopefully I'm going to be out from under the weather and able to get out here and get back to work over the next couple of weeks. Usually around Christmas time, things slow down a lot for me at work. I get to take some vacation time, and I'm really hoping this year to spend some time out here in the shop and get some things knocked out while I have a chance, because I know that come first of the year, things get crazy at work, and I'm pretty much out of pocket a lot in January and February each year. So I'm hoping that I'm going to have some time in December to get out here and play in the shop. And with that, guys, that's going to be a wrap for today. As always, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thumbs up and comments are appreciated. Please hit that bell icon to get notifications. Leave comments down below. All that really helps out with the analytics on YouTube. And guys, we'll catch you on the next video. Again, thanks for watching.